The abuse of King George VI. George VI was a reserved youth who wrestled with a speech impediment that persisted into his adult years, presenting a significant obstacle when faced with the expectation of delivering numerous public addresses as king. His upbringing, marked by stringent discipline, particularly under the authoritarian and excessively strict father, George V, is widely considered to have influenced his challenges. However, an often overlooked aspect of George VI's life is the maltreatment that he endured at the hands of his nanny, which exacerbated his anxiety. A particularly distressing element of George's past revolves around his malevolent nanny, whose real name was Mary Peters. Despite her seemingly inconspicuous role, she holds significant relevance in the annals of the House of Windsor. Both King George VI and his elder brother, King Edward VIII, suffered mistreatment during their childhood at the hands of their nanny. George VI spent much of his upbringing under the care of various nannies, not all of whom showed kindness. Their parents, King George V and Queen Mary, known for their strictness, maintained a distant presence, with the monarch expressing a desire for his children to regard him with fear. Yet it wasn't solely the father figure that instilled fear into the boys. Among the royal offspring, only Edward and George were subjected to the care of this malevolent nanny. While George may have been too young to retain many memories of her cruelty, its lingering effects manifested as he matured. She was dismissed in the autumn of 1897 when George was merely 2 years old, but she left an undeniable mark on his life. Originally hired to attend to Edward following his birth in 1894, she assumed responsibility for George upon his arrival. Mrs. Green exhibited signs of mental instability, having been abandoned by her husband and unable to conceive herself. Prior to marriage, she completed extensive training as a children's nursemaid and secured employment in the house of the Duke and Duchess of Newcastle. So once she became a nanny, what did she do to the boys? She would intentionally provoke George by pinching him, which would bring the young tot to tears before returning him to his parents, who in turn would hand him back to the nanny, subjecting the young prince to further torment, including withholding nourishment. What George had recounted about the nanny's habit of pinching him before she took him to see his parents was in fact her regular treatment of Edward. Remarkably, the sadistic caregiver held a deep affection for Edward, viewing him as her own son, fiercely guarding him against perceived intruders. Prior to his brief daily visits with his parents, she would subject him to twisted arms, pinches, and other forms of physical abuse, inducing him to cry. As George and Mary were averse to a crying infant, he would promptly be removed, enabling the nanny to maintain her control over them. It's crucial to note her affection was solely reserved for Edward. George, on the other hand, incurred her disdain. He was seen as an unwelcome interference in her imagined bond with Edward. He was consequently left neglected and mistreated. He would be tossed into his crib, neglected and deprived of food, often enduring starvation, followed by overfeeding until he fell ill. The sadistic nanny appeared to derive pleasure from witnessing George's suffering, mirroring the affection she bestowed upon Edward. The abuse inflicted upon George left him with lifelong digestive issues, compounded by the absence of physical touch or interaction, crucial for a healthy infant's development. Speculation from royal commentators suggests that George and Mary were so detached from their sons' daily lives that they failed to recognise the emotional and, at times, physical abuse perpetrated by the nanny. Concerns regarding the sadistic nanny's behaviour were harboured by other members of royal staff, though the issue remained undisclosed to Mary until after the birth of her daughter. The arrival of a new nanny, Charlotte Lala Bell, favoured by Prince John, shed light on the extent of the abuse. Lala Bell noticed the nanny's excessive possessiveness towards Edward, prompting discussions among the staff. Further inquiries revealed George's malnourishment and neglect, yet the fear of the nanny's wrath deterred anyone from intervening. Upon closer inspection, Lala discovered Edward's bruised body and George's frail condition, bringing the matter to Mary's attention through one of her ladies-in-waiting. The sadistic nanny faced a confrontation that led her to an irreversible mental breakdown. It emerged that throughout her 3-year tenure with the family, she had never taken a single day off. She was perhaps considered reliable by the parents, despite the detrimental toll on their children's well-being. The sadistic nanny's maltreatment cast a shadow of lasting repercussions over the family. Her actions likely contributed to both Edward and George's deep-seated insecurities, with Edward's struggles extending to his relationships with women, and George grappling with enduring health issues. Fortunately, the boys found solace under the care of their new nanny, Charlotte, whose demeanour was marked by cheerfulness, kindness, and affection. Supported by their grandmother, Queen Alexandra, both women endeavoured to fill the void of maternal love in the children's lives. It has even been reported that Edward even adopted a faint Cockney accent, owing to his extensive time that he spent with his new nanny, Charlotte.